I have now read and reviewed on this channel all of the books in the Bone story, and I will leave a link to a playlist in the description down below in which I have all of my Bone reviews of all the Bone related content. So the only thing left to tackle at this point is the various companion books or the explanatory material that go along with the Bone books. And there's actually a fair number of these if you search Amazon or you search your library catalog. But there's one that's officially published by Scholastic, and this seems to be the official Bone Handbook. And you can see this advertised in other Scholastic books. For example, here is Bone Tall Tales. And on the back of this, you can see all 10 Bone books, plus check out the Bone Handbook, the ultimate guide for every Bone fan. So they are advertising this as part of the complete Bone collection. So here it is, the Bone Handbook. Now, it is by Jeff Smith, apparently, although I heavily suspect this was ghostwritten. I think this was written by a committee or written by an anonymous ghostwriter, unless Jeff Smith likes to refer to himself in the third person. There's very little to indicate here that it's by Jeff Smith. There's no special insights into any of these characters that we wouldn't get from just reading the books. There's an interview with Jeff Smith, which I presume he didn't interview himself. There's an About Jeff Smith section here, which is written in the third person, etc. So, yeah, it's officially by Jeff Smith, but I don't think Jeff Smith probably had much to do with this. Or am I wrong? Let me know in the comments if you have any other information. So this handbook is very underwhelming. There are a few interesting things in here. So I count this as one of the interesting things. We get some of the illustrations from Jeff Smith's childhood here about the Phone Bone characters. But the bulk of this is just information that we already got from the comic books. So it's the characters, Phone Bone, in which we get a very surface level description of Phone Bone. And then we go through all of the characters here, in which we get no interesting information about them that we haven't already gotten from just reading the story. The possums. Example here, the Possum Kids. The Possum Kids love adventure and have a way of always finding trouble. Ms. Possum. Ms. Possum has her hands full keeping her kids in line and also helps Phone Bone during his first winter in the valley. Tennille and her brother. Tennille and her brother help Grandma Ben, Thorn in the Bones, while they're in Athea. Tennille has a special knowledge of prayer stones, and she builds a sculpture of Phone Bone and Bartleby that sits in Queen's Square. Roderick. Roderick is an orphaned raccoon whose parents were killed by the two stupid rat creatures, etc. I mean, you see what I mean here. And then we get the history of the valley, which, again, very little extra information here that we didn't already get from reading the epic. And then we get a summary of each of the books, which is exactly what it sounds like, just a very boring summary of each of the books. So this companion volume is very underwhelming. I would not recommend you spend any money on it. If you can get it from your library and you're a completist like me, fair enough. But yeah, there's not much of interest in here. And, as I read this, first of all, I was disappointed that it was so boring and so surface level. And then of course, I immediately thought to myself, well, what did you expect, stupid? It's a silly comic book for kids. Of course, the handbook is not going to have anything interesting in it. But then I thought, well, actually, there were opportunities here. There were things that could have been explained. More world building or more explaining of some of the plot points. And in my reviews of the Bone series, I mentioned some of the plot points that I was confused about, right? Like, when did Bartleby learn to talk? When he runs away from the bones, he can't talk. He shows up just what I think is just a few weeks later, maybe a few months later at most, depending on how time is passing in this comic, and then suddenly he can talk. How does Bone get a piece of the Lord of the Locust in him? I mean, that was never explained in the comics, right? Was that... my best guess is that it was from the first issue when he accidentally swallowed some of the locust, but that would have been something to spell out. That would have been an opportunity to clear this out. Yeah, here, let me show you an example. There's another thing right over here. Yes, so the summary of Book 6, Old Man's Cave. A massive earthquake strikes before the ritual can be completed, and the Bones, Grandma Ben, and Thorn rush to escape the crumbling ruins. Yeah, okay. So why did this earthquake happen? And if the ritual was not completed, then how did the Lord of the Locusts escape? And besides which, Briar had the wrong victim, right? So the ritual was wrong from the beginning, but this resulted in the Lord of the Locusts escaping. And without rehashing all my questions about the Bone plot, and maybe some of this is just me missing stuff. Maybe there are explanations for this stuff that I just missed, or I'm being a bit dense, or I don't know. But if we have space that we need to fill here, because Scholastic wants to create a Bone companion book, then get into exploring these plot points more. Yeah, get into the world building more. Just don't have a book that's just simply rehashing the 10 books that we already read before reading this book. There are plenty of areas to explore and do more world building and dive deeper. But no, this is not what this is. We do get a couple of new comics, though, which I wasn't expecting. I thought we were done with the Bone story. But we have a story about the kite, which takes place during the time when the Bones are staying at Grandma Ben's house. So, spoiler alert, I guess. It's split up over 3 parts. Phony Bone has this idea to escape from the valley and get back to Boneville by having Smiley Bone up on the kite. Foam Bone argues about it, and hijinks ensue. And then the hooded one wants to get the Bones, but is foiled by Smiley Bone crashing on the hooded one. So, yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about this story tonally. I mean, the Bone comics have always been a mix of cartoon with epic. But when we get to the parts when the hooded one dominates, the more serious part of the story is taking over. So to have the hooded one involved in the slapstick cartoonish part here seems to diminish her seriousness as a villain. On the other hand, by the cartoon logic of this universe, I guess this could happen here. Yeah. It could work, maybe. We could still have the slapstick here, and we could still have the hooded one become more of a serious threat later in the comic book. I don't know. Let me know what you think about it, as always. And then we've got one more comic at the very end. And this takes place in the point in the continuity when Phony Bone and Smiley Bone are working for Lucas. And Phony Bone is justifying how greed is actually good. And Smiley Bone suggests he creates a political party out of greed. And Phony Bone suggests turning it into religion. And then he said, what if you could make greed into a religion and a political party? Imagine the power you'd have. Nah, that could never happen. So I don't mean to explain the jokes here, but, well, I guess I'm going to explain the jokes. Well, I don't need to explain the jokes, do I? It's obvious. By ending on this frame here, that could never happen, and have that be the punchline. The only interpretation of this possible would be that this is ironic, and that's meant to imply that there is a political party that combines, or there is an ideology that combines greed as a religion and greed as a political party. And I have a guess which side of the political spectrum he is talking about here. You may have your own interpretation, but it's probably pretty obvious, right? So this is possibly a little bit heavy-handed, maybe? I don't know. What do you think about this? But yeah, so in addition to a few more pages of comics, we do have I guess I don't want to give the impression that none of the stuff is interesting here. We do have a conversation, or a description of how Bone was colored. Because Bone was originally published in black and white, and then it was covered for the Scholastic editions. And we have a description here of how the coloring process went. And then an interview with the colorist. So this is interesting here. In the previous video I did on the Bone series, I reviewed Bone Coda, in which Jeff Smith talked about how important the original black and white Bone comics were to him, because he was very proud of the work he had done to create black and white images, and how he was reluctant to get them into color initially. I think that's maybe important background information to have to understanding the care that they took to color these black and white images and make sure that they weren't losing the original art and the original feel of the art. So that would be my little critique of this, maybe, is that it would have been nice to talk more about why they were originally in black and white, how Jeff Smith feels about those black and white originals, how protective he is of them, and then have the conversation about how they went through the process of coloring it. But that's a minor point. It is interesting talking about the coloring process and the interview with the Steve Hamaker here, who was the colorist. So, some interesting stuff in this book. But on the whole, I would recommend saving your money on this one. Yeah, don't go out and pay money for this. If you can find it in your library, then fair enough.